So we know that states across the country are passing and implementing policies to ensure that their learners get work-based learning experiences and credentials that they'll need to be successful following graduation. During the 2025 legislative session, KnowledgeWorks, Education Commission of the States, and Advanced CTE identified that many work-based learning policies were leveraging student-centered approaches. These student-centered approaches allow learners to experience personalization in their career exploration process, leading to more relevant learning experiences and better prepared graduates. Today, we'll be discussing the implementation of some recently enacted legislation and hearing about policy and implementation further needed to support this work. We're going to have the opportunity to chat with speakers from 3 states that are leveraging student-centered learning strategies as they deepen, scale, and personalize career-connected learning opportunities in their states. Arizona, Delaware, and Montana have leveraged state policy flexibilities and supports to create education systems that empower learners and help them be career ready following graduation. Today, we're joined by Dr. John Wicker and Peter Boyle from Arizona, and then filling in for Superintendent Hedelin is Shannon Boswell. So thank you so much, Shannon, for joining us today. And so let's just go ahead and get into this discussion a little bit. There we go. Okay, perfect. So hi, everybody. I'm Emily Brixey, and I'm a senior manager at KnowledgeWorks, where I spent a lot of time reading and writing about statute and regulation that support student-centered approaches to education. I also lead KnowledgeWorks' legislative tracking work and corresponding projects. I'm joined today by my colleagues Lauren Bloomquist, Senior Policy Analyst at Education Commission of the States, and Veli Sando, Policy Associate at Advanced CTE. The 3 of us have partnered on the content for today's webinar. Each of our 3 organizations brings a really unique perspective that can help us understand this policy nexus that we're going to talk about. We'll each spend some time interviewing state leaders, but before we do that, we thought it'd be helpful to briefly highlight some of our expertise in education policy, what we're observing in the policy landscape, and why this conversation today is of interest. So I'm sure many of you know about KnowledgeWorks, but KnowledgeWorks is a national foundation based in Cincinnati, Ohio, that has been creating the future of learning for over 25 years. Committed to a systems approach to the future of learning, we're engaged in partnerships with school districts, state departments of education, and education service agencies to help them explore, deepen, and scale student-centered learning. And this includes practices in personalized and competency-based learning. Personalized learning means empowering learners to customize their learning experiences to meet their strengths, needs, and interests. While competency-based education practices allow learners to advance to higher levels of learning once they're able to demonstrate proficiency in concepts and skills rather than advancing after a set period of time. Personalized learning and competency-based learning practices are highly prevalent in workforce learning programs, and the presence of these components can help to deepen a student's learning experience. So, for example, a student may be able to explore various career pathways options within their schools and districts. And once a student has successfully completed a learning experience, say by obtaining a credential, they may move into a different career-based learning experience that interests them. So states, districts, and schools leveraging student-centered learning strategies to strengthen work-based learning programs is more than hypothetical, and we're seeing it happen across the country. As part of what we do at KnowledgeWorks, I track the legislation that supports and enables student-centered learning. During my review of enacted legislation during 2025, I tracked 43 enacted bills across 26 states that supported innovative student-centered approaches to improve student outcomes. I analyzed the content of the bills and identified 4 legislative trends: high school transformation, academic acceleration through personalization, sustainable funding, and the topic of today's discussion, career readiness. Not only do states want students to meet academic learning targets, but it's evidence that states want students to have career and workforce experiences that can help them explore options and prepare for their futures. My colleague Sean will go ahead and drop the link into the chat if you want to read more about what we saw during the last legislative session. But I'm really excited for the discussion today, as I think that we're going to be able to further elevate the benefits of leveraging student-centered learning strategies to improve career readiness for learners across the country. And while KnowledgeWorks brings a deep expertise in student-centered learning strategies, my colleagues at Education Commission of the States and Advanced CTE bring their own unique perspectives to help us understand this work. So Veli, I'm going to pass to you to share a little bit about Advanced CTE and your perspective.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us here today. As Emily mentioned, my name is Veli Sando, and I'm a policy associate at Advanced CTE. And for those of you who are not familiar with our organization, just a little bit of context. We are a membership organization, and we represent state career technical education directors and state leaders who are responsible for CTE at the secondary, post-secondary, and at the adult level as well. And we offer a plethora of services to our members. We do have members in across all the 50 states and 3 of the territories. And some of the services that we offer include federal advocacy office hours, where we offer a space to kind of disseminate information about what's happening at the federal level and the implications of it on CTE at the state level and to our members in their respective states. We also have virtual and in-person convening spaces where state directors can just convene and collaborate and hear what other states are doing in regards to CTE. And we also have technical assistance, resource development, and program implementation services as well. Now, with regards to student-centered learning, one of the main things that we do in terms of our resources is we track in association with the Association for Career and Technical Education, ACTE. We have over the past 13 years conducted state policy tracking efforts where we track CTE related policies, including policies that enable student-centered learning, such as work-based learning policies and just applied learning policy initiatives. Over the 2025 legislative period, we tracked 172 CTE related policies across 49 states, and 67 of those were related to work-based learning initiatives across 34 states. So we're seeing how states are increasingly leveraging work-based learning, whether it's through apprenticeship opportunities or things of that nature, to give students more autonomy and more engagement practically in applied methods in their learning experiences. One of our pillars at Advanced CTE is also increasing learner voice and choice in learning. And so we have a series on our resource center on our website, careertech.org, where we have some resources that have to do with learner voice and choice. And we've been doing case studies and more publication and research to really supplement the work that's already in the field, but to also make the case that student-centered learning indeed does have great outcomes on career readiness and outcomes as well. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Lauren to talk to us about Education Commission of the States.
Thank you, Veli, and thank you all for joining us. I'm really excited to be here and share this webinar with these wonderful people and their organizations. My name is Lauren Bloomquist, and I'm a Senior Policy Analyst at Education Commission of the States. If Education Commission of the States is new to you, I'd love to take a moment to introduce who we are and what we do. ECS is a non-advocacy organization that was founded by the states in 1965 through the Compact for Education. At that time, state leaders recognized the need for an organization that could help connect policymakers across the country and support education decision-making with high-quality information and shared learning. We serve as a resource to help state leaders to learn from one another. We work with all 50 states, DC, and the territories by identifying key challenges in education policy, highlighting promising approaches, and helping share what other states are doing. Our work spans the full education spectrum from early childhood education through the workforce. That means that we're not only looking at K-12 policy, but also how states are thinking about pathways to post-secondary opportunities, workforce alignment, and the broader systems that support student success over time. A big part of what informs our work is our legislative tracking. We monitor education-related bills across the country, as well as executive orders and task forces. This provides a perspective on what's emerging as priorities in the field, what states are paying attention to, and what innovations are taking shape. We also track all education-related topics in Governor's State of the State addresses, with over 30 addresses summarized so far for 2026. In addition, we learn from inquiries from state policymakers and state leaders, helping us identify issues that are top of mind. We also support states through a few key mechanisms, including research, reporting, convening, and counsel. Through avenues like legislative tracking, we identify key education issues across the country. We analyze these trends and publish resources that offer policy insights and state-level examples. Another is through convenings like this one, where state leaders and education policymakers can come together to share what they've done, what's working, lessons learned, and explore emerging issues. At ECS, along with our commissioners, we identified 6 policy priority areas to help state policymakers address their most critical needs. One of our current policy priority areas is building holistic skills and aligned pathways, which focuses on policies that support students in developing a comprehensive set of skills, providing a foundation for their future, and on systems that help them navigate meaningful pathways to success. We're excited to share the various ways states are supporting student-centered learning through state policy. With that, I'll pass it back to Veli to share insights from our first state.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Lauren. And I would like to invite Dr. John Wicker to the stage with me. John, I'm super happy to have you here today, and I'm super excited to have the conversation with you and for you to tell us about how the state of Delaware is incorporating student-centered learning approaches. So for our participant, just a little bit of a background about Dr. John Wickard. Dr. John Wickard is a state director of career and technical education and STEM initiatives at the Delaware Department of Education. He's responsible for leading and aligning federal and state education and workforce policy and programs to high growth industry sectors. And from my experience working with John is very committed to ensuring that all of Delaware has access to high quality education that centers on identity, is affordable and efficient, and results in a wealth generating career. So welcome, John. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing well, Veli. Thanks for including me in this conversation. I'm excited.
Of course. So my first question for you today is, can you give us a brief overview of how the Delaware Department of Education is incorporating learner voice and choice in learning and workforce development initiatives?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think contextually, it might be helpful for everyone to understand. So CTE in Delaware is like the heart of where this is happening. And CTE in Delaware, we reach about 60% of public school students in grades 6 through 8. About 70% of students in 9 through 12 with our programs, and then anywhere from 10 to 14,000 post-secondary learners each year. And so as we thought about student-centered learning, we realized that whatever we were going to do needed to work at scale and needed to be thought about systemically. And so we actually, I'm going to talk about a few things, but we probably spent 2 to 2.5 years trying to map systems, figure out where the leverage points were, build our own knowledge about what it actually means to be student-centered, right? And then, and only then did we move into actually realizing what we wanted to do before we rolled anything out was try it and prove we could do it in our office before we even touched policy. And so on that journey, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge, right, the great support we got from Advanced CTE. We also worked really closely with the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity, NAEP, and a gentleman named Wesley Williams with the National Opinion Research Center. So like phenomenal partners. And so, like I said, we decided to dip our toes in and write proof of concept in a few different areas to start with. And those areas really were thinking about students as co-designers, right? And so we started with thinking about middle grades. How could we rethink what it means for a student to leave grades 6 through 8 and move to high school and be ready for high school, but also have gone through a bunch of these experiences, right, that will lead them on the right path. And so at the core of that initiative is students. We've had students involved every step of the way. They're telling us about their experiences, what they want it to be, what it has been, right, all of these pieces. And that really opened our eyes to, well, as we develop more things, they need to be the first people that we talk to so that we can buffer their opinions because they're really the customer, right, against what we're hearing from industry, from educators, right, and from other places. And so we worked with Advanced CTE. Some of you may have seen there's a Green Jobs playbook that came out. We worked with you all to develop environmental literacy competencies. Veli was part of that project. Students developed a significant portion of what came out of that work right in the same room with employers. But then we thought more about like, how can we incorporate more immersive work-based learning, right, through our team? And so we're at a point now where our students actually work side by side in our office with our ed associates to manage everything to do with our career and technical student organizations. So like right now, we have a whole cohort of students that we trained, that we paid to help run our Educators Rising conference. And they're there running it right now. And then we're paying them to come back next year and train the next cohort, right?
Wow.
So, and we're doing that in every single CTSO, right? Like standing that model up. So students in the program, seeing a co-curricular, right? And helping us actually run these things. We've also brought in some interns over the summer. We direct hired some interns into our office. And they're helping us write our statewide career technical student organization policy. We've never had a policy. They're literally writing alongside of me and my team, right?
Wow.
That type of work. They're system design, right? We also put in place, and this is one I'm pretty excited about. We actually wrote into some of the contracts in our office that our vendors have to hire our CTE students in the execution of the contracts. So when we're hiring a web firm or someone that's developing content, right, those vendors are hiring our own students to develop the content through the student lens, right? And our students are getting paid for those things. And then I'd say the last thing, because we are keeping it brief on this one, there's just too much to talk about. We'll talk about this more in a minute. But from a policy perspective, we've actually written into our administrative policy how students must be involved in the design of our programs of study. So our students are literally designing with us in a paid work experience our CTE programs that stretch from 7th grade up into 12th grade, right? And
Wow.
developing the post-secondary connections and all the pieces. And so we've already developed, we've designed 3 programs that way at the state level. Everything's codified and like we're rolling now. So
Wow,
right,
that's
kind of what we
awesome.
have cooking.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff happening. Thank you for giving us that overview, John. And we're going to get into the program of study creation process in a bit. But from a macro perspective, I wanted you to talk a little bit about what the role of policy is in fostering student-centered learning approaches in the context of learning and workforce development. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but just in the terms of policy, how have you seen policy been leveraged, and how can policy be maximized to support these efforts?
Yeah, I think policy is a great tool, right? It does a few things. It conveys expectations, right? It steers the direction of state and also local activities, right? I don't know if it's more importantly local, but right, state and local activities, which is what you want. I also think, and I think this is especially important, it conveys your system values, right? It puts in writing what you value most and where you want people to focus time and energy, right? And other resources. And so I think that's especially important. What always concerns me with policy, as much as I think it's a great lever, right, is it can have unintended consequences, as we all know. People stick to the letter of it. It can stifle innovation. People might see it as, oh, that's the minimum, that's the bar I'm going to hit, and I'm going to stop. And so I think that combined with, there's a risk too that like we as policymakers need to realize that just writing the policy doesn't mean your local practitioners actually know how to do what you want them to do or have the resources to do it well. And so that was for us one of the big reasons we did what I said earlier, which is we slow rolled it and we tried to do it ourselves first, is we wanted to try to think about what are the barriers we were hearing from the field existed, what were the things we didn't know, right, that we needed to test, because we wanted to make sure that when we do roll policy out, right, we've addressed as many of those things on the front end, and we can proactively direct technical assistance, right, and other resources out to those practitioners so they're not just trying to figure it out on their own locally, because that's frustrating. Nobody wants to be in that position. And so I think that's where the risk with policy comes in. And I think there's some other things that go along well with policy that if you do them correctly, actually create better conditions for success.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate your candidness in this, because we know that some of the implementation processes of policies can be a little nuanced. And so I'm happy to hear you talk a little bit about how the piloting of some of these initiatives, and then being able to support on the back end after policy, the technical assistance to increase efficiency. So with that being said, John, talk to us a little bit about what you think are the primary contributing factors to Delaware's success in involving learners in these student-centered learning initiatives.
Yeah, I think these, right, are, like I said a second ago, as important, if not more important, at least initially, than policy, right? But I think once policy is in place, these factors have to continue, right? So the first one I would say is actually culture and commitment to this work, right? Within my team, we really sat down and said, look, we're committed to doing this, but we don't want to do harm in the process, right? And so we need to do it first. But we also need to not be afraid to challenge each other, right? And so when we look at the values on our team, we intentionally created a situation where we say, listen, like, students are going to be front and center. They're going to be, it's all about students, right? And equity. But then we're going to challenge each other within our team. So it's really interesting in meetings. Whenever a member of our team is talking about work they're doing, the first question they get asked by someone else every time is, where were the students involved and what did they have to say? And it's created some uncomfortable situations for some folks, right? Because you're never all on the same page at the same pace, right? But it also created a situation where those folks that maybe were a little behind, right, in that, everyone else said, how do I help you, right? And bring this forward. So I think that's like especially important, because you don't want the field to go to one person and get one answer or one level of technical assistance, and go to another person and get something different. Because then what happens is the local values around that activity will determine who they go to. They'll go to the person where they're going to get the answer they want, right? And that's often not what we want to happen, right? So I think culture and commitment are huge, right? Second thing I would say here, and you know him well, Dr. Michael Hill-Shaner, right, on our team. So a few years ago, when we knew we were really going to double down on this work, what I did is we had a vacancy, and I rewrote the position description, and I created a role called the Culturally Competent Workforce Lead, and set the vision that every single student that comes through our CTE programs is going to be culturally competent. And so that's going to make the entire Delaware workforce culturally competent. We knew we had really high quality programs from a technical skill aspect, right? But then we were like, well, wait a minute, students are going to be the ones running the world, right? Not us in a few years. So how do we set them up to design these things for the world that how they want it to look, right? And so literally this voice work, the student-centered work, is the responsibility of an individual on my team to coordinate, to set vision and direction. It is about 70% of Dr. Shaner's workload. So, right, put your resources, put your money where your mouth is, put your time where your mouth is, right? I really believe that's important. And then we also tried to make sure we were smart about, when you're working with students, things are going to take longer. You've got to onboard them. They're transitioning in and out, right? You have new cohorts. So we said, all right, we need to build that into our timelines, and we need to make sure that our focus is around quality, not just engagement. We wanted everything we do with them to be true co-design, right? And not just like chequity, right? And so we've made adjustments around that, right? And we've shifted financial resources in that direction as well. And I think the last thing, and Billy, I would say this is probably the hardest one for a lot of people, is, you have to be humble enough to hear the things you don't want to hear from those students, and to be open to trying things that maybe you're not comfortable with, but they're saying what is best for them. And, that I go back to culture, who you hire, right? Where you put your values. That's why I say, like, I think these factors are what help you create the right policy, right? But then when the policy is in place, these are the factors that enable it to be enacted the way that you need it to be.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all of that, John. I know we're coming up on our 15-minute mark here,
Mhm.
and I'm going to actually put in the program of study creation process policy in the chat so folks can look at it. But do you have any
Mhm.
last words specifically as it relates to that policy and just anyone looking, any other state even looking to implement such similar processes in their respective educational systems?
Yeah, we just, right, what Veli's referring to is we just released policy for how programs, CTE programs of study will be created at both the state and local level. And when you review this, you will see it's students. And students aren't just here and out. Students are all the way through. They're where we start. They're evaluating resources and materials and instructional methods. They're helping us develop new ones. They're literally part of the teams and signing off on a program before it gets approved. Um,
Yeah.
like I think it's powerful. Like I said, we've done it with 3 programs so far, and it's rolling really well. And it's also opened the door to what we heard earlier, which is what we call value add opportunities. So like our culinary students, they want like AP chemistry, right, to be part of a program of study, right? And so we said, well, wait a minute, like that's a 4th level, so you get your core. Why shouldn't we have more academic AP and dual enrollment as a way for students to increase either depth or breadth? And, in the same vein, why can't a healthcare student take an entrepreneurship class because they think they want to own their, right? And so really
Yeah. So
leveraging the
that
modernized career clusters framework,
yeah.
right, in conjunction with student-centered learning to rethink our programs, right? And I'm really excited because we're about to enter an era where I think because of the students, we're going to have much stronger programs than we've ever had. And I think we're also going to have
Yes.
much more equitable systems.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on here to talk about Delaware's initiatives, John. And now we're going to welcome Lauren to the stage to facilitate a discussion with the state of Montana.
Hi, thank you, Veli. We'd like to welcome Shannon Boswell from Montana's Office of Public Instruction. Thank you so much for filling in for Superintendent Hedlund. Shannon is the Director of Career and Technical Education and brings more than 2 decades of classroom and statewide leadership experience to her role. She spent 13 years teaching high school agriculture in rural West Virginia, where she grew the program from 30 to 90 students and led the expansion of 3,000 square feet of laboratory and school-based enterprise space, including a greenhouse and an animal processing facility. Her work emphasized real-world, hands-on learning and strong partnerships with local businesses to ensure students graduated with career-ready skills. In 2017, Ms. Boswell joined the Montana Office of Public Instruction as an agriculture education specialist. She assumed her current role in 2020, where she champions access to high-quality career and technical education for all learners. She leads her team in creating flexible, innovative pathways that allow schools across Montana to deliver career and technical education programs tailored to their local community needs. Thank you again so much for joining us and to share more about Montana's work to advance student-centered learning. To start off, we'd love if you could share a brief overview of how your state is enabling student-centered, career-connected experience.
Yeah, thank you. I think Montana, we have a lot of really unique opportunities that have been given to us through legislative process. A few of the things that come to mind for how we are really trying to engage student-centered workforce development are through our advanced opportunities. This is funding that was given to schools to help offset out-of-pocket costs for parents, for students to be able to do things like take some dual credit courses, to take some specialized training, receive some of those industry recognized credentials, things that they may have had to pay for themselves. So it gives them an opportunity and kind of evens the playing field for all of our students. The other thing, thinking about the work that we've just recently done, we've adopted new Montana career pathways and are really trying to have a lot of flexibilities within those for our students as they kind of look across multiple pathways, maybe even thinking about, how does business and ag relate together and how do they tie those pathways together in the work that they want to do. Some other things that are coming for us, our recent legislation that was passed of a STARS Act, that provides some future ready payment, which is incentive for the schools, to encourage those students to be earning industry recognized credentials and dual credit while they're in high school. And so those are a lot of the ways that I think our state has really leveraged access to students and really trying to expand what's available. We have some unique challenges in Montana, being a pretty rural and frontier state. So not everyone has the same access to opportunities, and really just trying to provide that opportunity for all students.
Fantastic. You touched on a couple of things, pathways, expanding opportunities. You mentioned funding. In 2025, Montana passed HB 357, which expanded opportunities to middle school students to engage in that student-centered learning and explore career pathways. What ways do you think that that's helping facilitate some of the things that you mentioned? So having students have the availability for multiple pathways and what that means for their future growth.
Yeah, I think one of the things it's going to do is really put some support to those middle school CT programs, to give them some funding that they need, maybe to update materials and equipment, and really get those students a leg up starting at a much earlier age. We have a lot of K-12 schools, and so we end up with a lot of teachers that are teaching middle school and high school programs together. So it gives them a little additional funding to support that work. And even those schools that are fortunate enough to have a separate middle school and high school, it provides them the opportunity to really think about linking how that program feeds into the high school pathways. One of the things that we've done with our pathway adoption is to include those prior to secondary coursework that they do in 7th and 8th grade to be a foundational piece of their pathway. And so the funding that is going to be available through HB 357 will help strengthen those and really get more exploration and more skill set available for those students. There's not a ton of middle school funding specific in Montana for CTE, and so this is a really great way for the door to start that process of getting more funding, hopefully, for those middle school programs. We've seen some expansion with several other opportunities, like advanced opportunities being fully funded for all schools. So I think those two things working together, along with some of the federal funding that we have, is really going to help strengthen that for our middle schools.
Thank you. And then providing this opportunity to younger students, how do you think that that helps them identify pathways and maybe strengthen those connections to future learning opportunities through high school and beyond?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that go into play with our middle school students, right? Not only getting some earlier exposure to different careers that are out there and having that career exploration piece, but getting involved with those career student organizations at a younger age, giving them exposure to other opportunities that are out there, getting to network. They get to meet a lot of really, industry leaders and folks that come in and support those CTSO events. They get to meet along with educational partners. So it really gives them exposure to not only what's available maybe beyond middle school, right? What's available at the high school, but even what's available beyond that, to start thinking about, do I go to a 2-year college? Do I go to a 4-year college? Am I looking at an apprenticeship or a pre-apprenticeship in high school? So I think it just opens those opportunities and gets them not only thinking about their future, but gets them more connected to their school, to school in general. I think having those supports is really going to, hopefully we'll start to see, more student success in other areas as well, as they start to think about how all of that applies and works together in the future.
Thank you. You talked about kind of that connectedness to school. I know that we're always trying to think about how we can engage students, keep them engaged, from middle school through high school. A couple other things you mentioned were apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships and talking to other leaders in their community. And on that note, are there any partnerships either with local employers, community colleges, or other community organizations that are important to help build kind of that bridge between education and industry?
Absolutely. I think, Montana, we joke is one big small town. That on a state level, we are very fortunate that a lot of our boards and partners are together on various projects. And so thinking from a state level, we're very fortunate that our Montana State Chamber is a part of our CTE work. They come in with questions and really trying to connect with those middle school and high school students as well. They have their own educational platform now that's really supporting the work. We partner with Department of Labor and Industry in a lot of areas when we think about workforce development. Part of the State Workforce Innovation Board is part of the work that helps connect with our high schools and our middle schools as well. Some other partnerships that are really valuable. We partner with Office of Commission of Higher Education, which then in turns brings those 2-year and 4-year colleges to the table, and various business associations, our contractors association, auto dealers, all of these different industries are part of these conversations, which I think is really important because what we do at the state level, we're able to model and bring down to the local level as well. And so we've been really fortunate in the past few years. We've set up a lot of regional meetings so that those partners are at the table together, bringing a bunch of high schools and middle school partners to the table with our 2-year colleges. And maybe they didn't have some of that connection before. And so they realize now it opens up some opportunity. A lot of our 2-year colleges have some programs in place to bring middle schoolers to campus and get them a tour of their programs and facilities. So there's a lot of different things out there that are really important. I think the last one that I maybe didn't mention are CTSOs. It's important to have them involved with the work too, because it's an outreach of what the students are learning in the classroom, and they're getting to get that leadership development as well.
Fantastic. As you think about Montana's future, you're talking about really broadening these pathways, starting in middle school through high school and beyond. Do you have any ideas or thoughts about what the next steps are for your state in terms of that student-supported learning or student-centered learning?
Funding's always on the table, right? Would love to see some of that broaden into how we fund at the state level for high school CTE be equitable for the middle school CTE. I think that would be a great opportunity for us to expand. Really thinking about um, how do we provide some of those earlier level of work-based learning opportunities for middle school, doing some job shadows and some of those foundational pieces of that work. And so I think there's more ways to continue the work we've been doing at the high school levels and get that pushed down further into the middle school and even elementary. There's been some conversation about how do we start some early exposure to students of just what different careers are when they're in elementary school, and opening their minds to realize that there's a lot of different things out there for them to do when they grow up.
Thank you so much for sharing the great work in Montana, and thank you so much for being here today. Now I'd like to pass it back to Emily to talk with our final state.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. We've had so many, this has been such a great conversation so far. And Peter, I'm really excited that we get to round it out with Arizona, a state that KnowledgeWorks has been working with for a very, very long time. So excited to hear more from you. Just to quickly introduce Peter, Peter Boyle is Senior Director for Education at Center for the Future of Arizona, also known as CFA, where he leads CFA's work in educational leadership, college and career pathways, and the future of learning. Prior to joining CFA, Peter was founding school director of Western School of Science and Technology, the highest performing public high school in West Phoenix. He holds a BS from the University of North Carolina, an MED from Arizona State University, and an educational leadership certificate from Stanford University. In 2022, he was elected to represent District 1 on the governing board of the East Valley Institute of Technology, also known as EVIT, and he currently serves as the governing board's president. So, Peter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Emily, for the invitation. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So just kind of to kick us off, I'm wondering if you can give us kind of a brief overview of how Arizona is enabling student-centered work-based learning.
Of course, it might be tough to be brief because here in the great state 48, we're doing quite a bit of work around career connective learning, but I'll try my best to encapsulate it a little bit. I want to start with a pretty recent success along these lines, which is last month, our partners at Arizona Institute on Education and the Economy, AIEE. I know some of them are on the call today, so big shout out to them for their leadership. Launched the State 48 Graduate Profile, which is a shared definition for what it means to be truly ready for life after high school. And that articulates a shared foundation of competencies across 8 essential durable skills that can prepare students for 4 futures. So enrollment, employment, enlistment in service, or entrepreneurship. And we, as strong partners and supporters of this initiative, really believe that with widespread adoption, this will help clarify what it means for all 1.2 million of our Arizona students to be ready for life after high school. And of course, that would include a framework for collaboration across constituencies, whether that's K-12 or business and industry partners, that can be used to design and facilitate those career-connected learning experiences. So that was a recent win. A win 30 years ago was when our legislature created Career and Technical Education Districts, or CTEDs. These are statutorily authorized public school districts that are responsible for the content, quality, and delivery of career and technical education across multiple public school districts. So, for example, you mentioned that I serve on the governing board of the Evett School District, and we have 11 partner public school districts and 1 partner public charter district that we serve as the career and technical education partner. And so that allows for really the economies of scale within a very fractured educational landscape and helps ensure that students have access to those resource and capital intensive CTE programs that might not be possible from just one single public school district or charter network. I think another real key element of our career connected learning here in Arizona is our Education and Career Action Plan, or ECAP. It's a legislatively, mandated requirement that all Arizona high schoolers complete before graduating. And ideally, it is co-designed with counselors and other members of the student's family or, educational supporters, et cetera, and includes the academic, extracurricular, career, and post-secondary education goals for the students. So we're not just releasing the doors open after graduation, that there's actually some planning that goes on aligned to students' career interests right there in high school. I think it's important to note that our state has adopted career literacy standards and exploration standards for grades K through 8. I know our colleague from Montana was speaking about the importance of early career literacy. We really see that in Arizona as well. And then also in terms of the policy space, back in 2021, Arizona passed the Instructional Time Model, or ITM legislation, which for the first time divorced funding for public schools from seat time, which provided flexibility for work-based learning experiences, both within and then without the traditional school day, as well as other career-connected learning opportunities. And so one way that we support this at CFA is through our Arizona Personalized Learning Network, facilitated with our friends at KnowledgeWorks. So thank you to you and your teammates. I know Robin's on the call for your partnership in that work, in which 4 diverse public school districts committed to a 7-year transformation to shift their systems to personalized competency-based learning models. And those districts are using those PCBL strategies to support career-connected learning. So I tried to be as brief as possible and cover a lot of ground, but we've got a lot of, I think, really strong career-connected learning here in Arizona.
Yeah, I was going to say if the audience is feeling like that was a bit of a whirlwind, it's because it was. Arizona has done a lot to set up their policy. So one of the things that you mentioned was that State 48 graduate profile, which my colleague Mamion can link in the chat if anyone wants to check that out. And Peter, I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit about the process of developing that and how you anticipate it's going to improve career-connected learning in Arizona.
Absolutely, Emily. So the State 48 graduate profile emerged through a process facilitated, again, by our partners at Arizona Institute for Education and the Economy. And it was really through a year-long project of gathering feedback from constituencies across the state. So it started with a convening kickoff with leaders representing education, business and industry, the policy space. Then next, a statewide survey with over 3,000 respondents, including students, educators, families, and business leaders were able to identify what they wanted to see from a graduate profile. Next, moved into a series of high school student focus groups. One of the through lines I think we're seeing is the importance of student voice, choice, and agency in both just secondary education in general, but also as it relates to career-connected learning. And I think we can talk about that in a little bit too. And then I think what's really unique about the graduate profile is it also very intentionally included data and feedback for workforce needs. So providing a further link between K-12 education and what comes next, right? Business and industry partners. It's been backed by over 200 organizations in our state, including public school districts, our leading business organizations. And we're really excited that for the first time, Arizona has a shared definition for what it means to be ready for life after high school. So we're envisioning that this can be used by school districts to build pathways with business and industry partners. They'll be speaking the same language, reflecting again those 8 essential competencies to build those work-based learning experiences. And I want to be particularly I think it's particularly important to note that this statewide effort does not replace a district's portrait of a graduate if it does have one, but it can be used to facilitate alignment and coherence between partners across the system. So as districts are graduating students moving on to post-secondary education, career-connected learning experiences, there's a shared framework for competencies across those constituencies, so that there's really, I think, a better chance for student success in those career-connected learning experiences because of that shared aspect. And again, major kudos to our partners at AIEE for leading that effort.
Yeah, I think the creation and utilization of the portrait has been really instrumental in the state. Really excited to see it get used more deeply. That was pretty recently rolled out. So definitely feel free to check it out if you haven't seen it already. So the other thing that you mentioned, Peter, was those CTEDs, those career technical education districts. And so in addition to providing apprenticeships and certifications, Arizona also has a very unique model where these CTEDs can award associate's degrees. And I'm curious, as a governing board member of the CTED, specifically the president, can you speak to how learners are benefiting from that CTED model?
Well, I'm a bit biased, right? So I'll just name that up front. But we know from data that Arizona's CTE completers not only graduate with both diplomas and career certificates, but are over 20% more likely to pursue and complete post-secondary education opportunities. So CTE is a strong indicator of both high school and then post-high school success. Arizona has 15 career and technical education districts, or CTEDs. And as I mentioned earlier, they allow for economies of scale within a very fractured education landscape. So to give you just an example, Arizona has about 600 local education agencies. Some of those are small single-site charters, but even excluding those, here in Maricopa County, we have 58 public school districts. If each one of those were responsible for the full battery of career and technical education programs, that would be too much, really, for some of our districts to be able to do on their own. So resource and capital intensive CTE programs can be centralized at the CTED, and then the programs requiring less resources can maybe still exist at the satellite campuses at a student's home high school. So how it works for central campus programs, students attend half the day-ish at their home high school, taking core classes, electives, and then the other half of the day at the CTED, taking those CTE courses, working towards their certifications, and completing work-based learning experiences like their clinicals. And the funding mechanism is an additional average daily membership, or ADM. That's what we call our funding mechanism in Arizona, which funds the CTED. And then for those satellite programs, additional ADM is split between the CTED and the home district to, again, provide additional resources to fund those CTE programs. CTEDs generally block schedule their programs, so that allows students to complete more than one CTE sequence in high school, which is pretty fantastic if you're a student graduating and moving into the workforce with not just a high school diploma, maybe some dual enrollment credit embedded in your CTE sequence, and then one or more certifications, which is, I think, a really strong element of ensuring that Arizona students are both college and career. I think that and is really important, ready after high school. And one of the things that the CTEDs are able to do is incubate innovation and provide that seamless pathway to post-secondary, because recent legislation allows CTEDs to also host associate degrees programs. So students can graduate with an associate's degree from a CTED as well. And EVIT was proud that our first associate's degree graduates graduated last year. So what this means, since the CTE program, the high school program, the associate's degree, and then apprenticeship opportunities, EVIT is a federal apprenticeship hub, are all located at one district, it means that fewer students are falling through the cracks as they progress along that career-connected learning pathway. So high school diploma, career certification, associate's degrees, moving on to maybe a more advanced certification, maybe additional higher education opportunities. And so I think it's a really exciting way that we're not just leveraging economies of scale, but also ensuring that at those key elements in a student's educational journey, they're not falling through the cracks and they still have access to the full suite of career-connected learning experiences at one institution.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, for sharing a little bit more about that model. I find it very, very fascinating as a little policy wonk myself. So another thing that you started to touch on, but I would love to hear you elaborate a little bit more around, is about implementing student voice and choice. Can you tell me a little bit about what that looks like in Arizona and how student voice, choice, and agency is really important in career-connected learning in your state?
Sure. So one of the hallmarks of CFA is the importance of elevating the voices of everyday Arizonans as a powerful tool to both identify and then collaboratively solve Arizona's pressing public issues. So that includes, I think, very importantly, elevating the voices of our youngest Arizonans, our students, to collaboratively build a stronger and brighter future for our state, which is our mission. And so one of our initiatives is the Arizona Pathways to Prosperity program, through which we aim to ensure that all students have access to and then pursue a pathway that has no wrong front door, no dead end, leading to a family supporting career of choice in a high wage, high skill, and high demand career. And we served over 300,000 students last year through that program. I know several of my Pathways colleagues are on the call. I know I've shouted out lots of folks, but really glad for the Arizona representation today. And through our Pathways initiative, we recently completed an Education, Innovation, and Research, or EIR, proposal, where we found the real need for increased student voice, choice, and agency in career-connected pathways activities. So through an initiative with over a dozen different high school partners, CFA built a career-connected toolkit, a co-advising framework, which means that the responsibility for advising students on their educational and career path is shared across multiple individuals, and also a design thinking challenge that pushed students to build a career-connected learning program at their school or in their community. And all of these elements included periodic student surveys on their experiences. And what we found was when students saw that their own voice, choice, and agency was being activated in their Pathways programs and in their career-connected learning, they were more likely to pursue post-secondary education or training opportunities. We saw pretty dramatic increases in computer science and cybersecurity dual enrollment courses. And I think what's really cool about this was districts were listening and they ended up building aligned and coherent pathways based on what they heard from their students and based on student interest. And so it was really neat to see how when we listen to our students and we build programs centered around the students, how strong the outcomes are for education and for workforce.
Yeah, that's definitely true, Peter. Thanks. And so just kind of to wrap us up, as we're kind of sharing this great story of Arizona, I would love to hear kind of what you think the next step is for your state to support student-centered workforce development and career readiness.
I'd like to point to two initiatives. One is that last year, the state launched the Arizona Career Exploration Partnership Plan, which is an effort led by my colleague Cindy Irwin here on the call with ADE, our Department of Education, and several other stakeholders, both statewide and nationally, to collaboratively create a vision for future forward career exploration. What that looks like is, as several other states have mentioned, the early career literacy or maybe a middle grades ECAP, roadmap and mapping future opportunities for policymaking, rulemaking, or practices that can be adopted by districts across the state. So again, the really intensive effort to focus on the importance of career literacy and career exploration. And another effort that I want to elevate, again with our partners at AIEE and KnowledgeWorks, Emily's been a key part of this one, is that we are launching the Permission Granted Project next month as a playbook for schools and districts to leverage policy flexibilities, some of which I've mentioned today, that support both the State 48 graduate profile, but also just student-centered success in education, including through career-connected learning experiences. And so we're really excited that by releasing these resources and a continued partnership with implementation support, we'll be able to see, I think, continued student success, especially as that relates to career-connected education.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Peter. Like I said, I always love hearing about Arizona, and I'm sure our audience enjoyed that as well. At this point, I would love to invite the rest of our speakers to go ahead and come back on stage just as we sort of wrap up this webinar. So during the webinar, we were able to take a really deep look into these 3 states engaged in this work. One of the things that we heard throughout this conversation was the importance of student voice in this process, from developing those policies in Delaware to being able to have those career pathway options in Montana, and also that really deep student agency that's occurring across Arizona. So that was one thing that really stood out to me. I'm sure that the audience had some really great takeaways as well. And if anyone on this call today would like to learn more about how states are leveraging student-centered learning strategies in career-connected learning policies, you can check out the blog that KnowledgeWorks Education Commission of the States and Advanced CTE recently wrote, where we highlight some examples of state policies that support the growth and success of career exploration, graduation requirements, and credentialing through student-centered learning approaches. So we will post that link in the chat. Also, anyone on the call should feel free to connect directly with myself, Lauren or Veli, by email, which are now shared on our closing screen. And finally, I just want to take a second to thank our amazing panelists, Dr. John Wickert, Shannon Boswell, and Peter Boyle, one last time for sharing about the great work that's going on in their states. And of course, our partners at Education Commission of the States and Advanced CTE, Lauren and Veli, for being great thought partners around this work and facilitating a really wonderful webinar today. People in attendance will receive a follow-up email with the webinar recording and links to resources that you may find helpful or interesting. So we hope that you'll stay in touch and keep the conversation going. Have a wonderful day, everybody.